I've never done this one before. Cerium sepium is a neat little hair streak that's actually fairly common. I screwed up. The rest of it is sepium. And here's the egg of sepium. The egg is very intricate. It's an intricate pattern of little cells, very delicate little pattern. The micropore up here at the top is the entryway for the fertilization of sperm enters. Here's what the first instar looks like, kind of typical of lycanids or licanids. Little larvae with very, oops, sorry. Little larvae with proportionally very long hairs or setae.
Yeah.
Or you don't know. Okay. And
just the ones.
And a darkly colored head. In this case, it's a dark brown. Many of the licanids have black heads. The larva, as it grows larger, becomes green and it develops these interesting parallel stripes, one on each dorsal side. And as it gets older, these very faint diagonal stripes become a little bit more prominent.
I don't recognize the host plant. What is that?
We'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
Maybe you can recognize it a little bit better so I can see a pattern here. It's Ceanothus, sorry. Cerium sepium becomes kind of a handsome larva. Again, the white stripes become more prominent and the little setae or hairs become more numerous but proportionately shorter. And then the final instar, the fourth instar, is a rather handsome larva, pretty much all green. It blends in beautifully with the Ceanothus leaf that it feeds on. And here's a pupa, pretty typical of licanid pupae. It has several swaths of silk to tie it to the leaf. And yeah, you don't really wonder it's eggs. Anyway, this is the pupa, and it's tied down with the silk strands around its middle there, hold it in place. Another view from the dorsal side.
What are we seeing off to the left there? The sort of.
Oh, this is the old fourth instar larval skin that it shed when it was pupating. Now that's sepium, right, John?
That's a beaut, man.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is sepium, and it's on one of the, I think that's tall buckwheat that it's on, and they nectar on just about anything that's available, but buckwheats are among the favorites. And again, like the Beer's hair streak, they have kind of a castellation appearance on the hind wing. And here's a real typical habitat. They're kind of a forest edge butterfly. They like air. This is what used to be Reeser Creek before the big fire. The main road going up Reeser Creek, and there's lots of Ceanothus, these nice shrubs along the edge of the road. Here's a little
Ceanothus that we used, the variety we used?
Yeah, velutinus.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Ceanothus velutinus. And these are great plants for butterfly larvae. This is a close-up of the Ceanothus, and of course they have the big showy white flowers, and then they've got the many leaves. The leaves overwinter on these plants, and so you see these old dull leaves from last year, and then you see the nice fresh new leaves. The larvae will be feeding on these fresh new leaves.
They don't feed on the old leaves at all?
I'm sorry?
They don't feed on the old leaves at all?
Not as far as I know. I've never seen them on the old leaves. They could. They probably could, especially on a bad year when the leaves, when it's a late spring.
Well, they diapause as eggs, so sometimes if they broke a diapause, they might have to eat old leaves.
Sure. And sometimes on these overwinter leaves, sometimes you see some that look reasonably good still in the spring, and they could feed on those, but they certainly prefer these nice, fresh, succulent ones. Now, we have at least 6 species of butterflies that use Ceanothus as their larval host plant. Does anybody name one of them?
California hair streak?
Which one?
California tortoiseshell.
California tortoiseshell, yeah. And the California tortoiseshell is a leaf eater. Anyway, the California tortoiseshell does use the leaves, and they can be present in large numbers on ceanothus. Sometimes they will actually denude the whole ceanothus plant. They just absolutely strip it of leaves on an outbreak year. Anything else that uses
Pale
this?
swallowtail. Pale swallowtail.
Pale swallowtail, very good. Pale swallowtail also feeds on leaves, and they'll lay a single egg. They have big round eggs, and they'll lay it on the dorsal surface of a leaf, like right there, usually about mid-height on the shrub, and then you get these big green larvae that develop. We also have a skipper. It's called the Pacubius skipper that uses this same plant. They also feed on leaves. And likewise, they put a single egg on the leaf. They put it on the underside of the leaf. They're harder to see. And then when we have the lichenids, we have the one we're talking about tonight, the Ceterium sepium, the hetero hair streak, which the adult butterflies lay a lot of eggs. If you get one in captivity and it dumps its eggs, you might get 150 eggs, and they'll all hatch. I mean, they're really pretty easy to rear. And they do feed on the leaf, or yes, on the leaves as well. And then you have things like the brown elfin, Calophrys augustinus, and it feeds on the flowers and the little fruits that are produced from the flowers. The California hair streak, Calophrys californicum, or Ceterium californicum, also feeds on the flowers. So you have a lot of things that use, oh, and then spring azure. The spring azure uses the flowers. Was that 7 then? 7 species that feed on this one plant.
How about the ceanothus silk moth? Does it use it?
Yeah, probably does, yeah.
I thought so, but I had some confusion. Where I got my confusion, I don't remember, but I became not sure at some point.
Well, that's the one of those moths that actually has the name of the food plant in this name that's actually represented. We'll cover a situation tonight where that doesn't, it's not so. And,
Wonder what that would be.
yeah.
So 7 species feed on this plant. It's really a very cool plant, lovely plant, and of course it's very fragrant in the spring. It's also a terrific nectar plant, one that's fresh. Sometimes you'll see a whole suite of swallowtails draped all over these plants' nectar. So that then concludes, I believe, my presentation.
It's also, it's one of those plants that does very well after burns. So when you go back up to that roadside that's all toast last year, another 3 years, you'll see millions of Ceterium sepium.
That'll be good. And actually, this place where I took this one photo we saw is just outside the burn, so that actually is still there.
The germination is dependent on a burn. Whether it's 100% dependent, I question, but normally the seeds won't germinate unless they've been heat treated, like a burn.
Okay?
Okay, now you
This is a pretty amazing little butterfly. It's actually probably starting to hatch right now over in Stemley Coulee as an example, and probably in Stockane Canyon as well. It's one of our very earliest spring butterflies. That's one of our few green butterflies. We only have 3 species of green butterflies, and they're all closely related. This picture was taken in Stemley Coulee, which is over by Vantage. And this is its favorite nectar plant, which is Gray's Homation, Gray's desert parsley. The butterfly overwinters in the pupa. It's a fully developed pupa. Basically, it develops the adult butterfly inside the pupa before it overwinters. And so it's ready to pop out the very first thing in the spring when the weather, probably the first day you're going to have 60 degrees and a glimpse of the sun, it'll start hatching. It's a very hardy butterfly. Here's what the egg looks like in the wild. This is a leaf of the northern buckwheat area and compositum, and that's its host plant. And if you look carefully on these plants, you'll see these little leaves just coming out, and you can spot them occasionally. Occasionally you can spot a little egg. Here's a close-up of the egg, and kind of interwoven down in the hairs on the surface of the leaf. pretty typical of Lycaenids, the group of butterflies, which includes the hair-streaked toppers and blues. It's like a slightly compressed or squished tennis ball with little surface articulations on it.
What's the little red beads?
Those are markings on the plant.
Okay.
And I don't really know just what they are. Part of the plant. Here's what the first instar looks like, and this is very small. It's only 2.2 millimeters long. And typical of first instars, it has proportionally very long setae or hairs sticking up from these little darkened bullae or raised spots on the back. And as it grows, the spines or hairs get proportionally shorter. And Stabili the larvae are pretty much green all the way through their growth. Second instar here, and you see how it's feeding on the leaf there, eating a little bit of the leaf. Here's the third instar. Third instar, they develop this nice lighter green stripe along the side. This is the head end up here, and the head actually is kind of retractable, and it'll be below the larva. It'll stick its head down and chew holes in the leaves, but you actually don't see the head itself unless you pick up the larva and turn it over. Some years ago, again, these are very early butterflies. They fly very early in the spring, in March, often in pretty awful weather, and they still manage to survive. And they develop pretty quickly. The larvae develop in less than a month, so they're already in the pupa stage by probably early to mid-April. And so their life cycle is basically completed. From that point on, they're going to be sitting there in the pupa all through the rest of the summer, all through the winter, and then they're going to catch up in the next spring. But much later in the year, we're talking September, way up at high altitudes, like up on Chopstick Mountain in Chelan County, some years ago, we started finding these bizarre larvae with all these red spots, and they came in several flavors. Here's another version of the same thing, and they were on a different buckwheat. These were on the tall buckwheat, Ariaga nivellatum, feeding on the flowers, and we really couldn't figure out just what we were finding there. I showed a fellow who had quite a bit of expertise in larvae, and he said he didn't know what they were. And so we managed to rear a few through, and in the springtime, up pops a Sheridan's hair streak. And here's a more typical Sheridan's hair streak. This is down at a lower elevation, and again, this was the green form. And then they form these very typical pupae, very typical of Lycaenids, where they have the one end is swollen large and the other end and covered with short bristles, very typical. But what we found was that these larvae at higher elevations were feeding, like I say, on a different buckwheat, and they were not only that, they were feeding on the flowers of the buckwheat. The ones early in the season are feeding on the leaves because they're on the flowers yet. And there's not much in the way of color in leaves, and so the larvae are green. But on the tall buckwheat, much later in the season, up at high elevation, they're feeding on the flowers. Flowers have this very pigment, little dots of pigment in the flowers, and these larvae pick up those pigments, and so we're getting these very unusual color forms, which are same species, very same species. So here again is the adult, the Sheridan's hair streak, with a relatively continuous line. This one's kind of broken, but it's in a fairly straight line, as opposed to the look-alike, which can fly in the same areas. So Sheridan's hair streak. This is their preferred host plant, especially at lower elevations, the northern buckwheat. And the buckwheat comes in a couple of color flavors, the bright yellow or the almost, well, it's kind of a pale yellow white color. These are all the same thing. Often you'll see these very different colors growing right together, but they're exactly the same species. I don't know why such color difference, but that's the northern buckwheat. But up at high elevations, this is the flower, this is the buckwheat that they use, and this is a tall buckwheat, and they have these large basal leaves, and then these long gangly stems, and then the tiny little flowers have these, if you take a very close look at them, they have these bright pink little spots of color, and that's what the larvae feed on, and so they develop these interesting color forms. So that's all I have for the Sheridan's Airstream. Are there any questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If you raised one of the ones that started out with a tall buckwheat mother and put an egg on a northern buckwheat, would it grow up looking like the lowland form that eats the northern buckwheat?
That's one of several thousand questions I don't know the answer to. That'd be a very interesting project to do, to find out if they would actually adjust. See, their timing is so different. They've developed a timing so that the adults are flying much later in the year, and the larvae eggs are hatching, the larvae are developing in September. Well, down in the lowlands are developing in March. So I don't know I don't know what would happen. It would be an interesting experience.
Just that at first they looked so oddly different, then they're camouflaged on their host. And so, of course, they want to adapt to camouflage to their host, and maybe there could be some variability in their ability to camouflage to their host. I don't know. But it would be amazing if they could, but I wouldn't be shocked if they could.
My personal feeling, I think David James agrees with me, is that the larvae don't change colors to match their host. They change colors by feeding on the color pigment in the flowers. That pigment actually enters their body and gives them color.
But in the end, they've changed colors to match their host.
Yeah, but not, they can't do it on demand. They do it as a result of feeding on the pigment.
Then if you put the egg, move the egg from one to the other, or the parent somehow were able to transfer, it would seem from what you're saying that maybe they could look like the other kind if they were raised on the other host.
I would expect them to be green if they survive. Yeah.
The tall buckwheat one moved to the compositum, you expect to be green.
I would expect that, but I don't know. Al?
In doing your life histories book, did you find other larvae that were modified by what they were eating?
Oh yeah. There are several, especially some of the blues, which very much react to the pigments in the plants. If you look at things like the gray hair streak larvae, I have a whole series of gray hair streak larvae from different plants, and they're actually photographed on the plants, and you can match them up with the color of the plant. Here's one that's purple, and you see the flower it's on is purple pigment. Here's one that's green because it's feeding on the leaf of that plant, and it's an extremely variable butterfly, and it just matches the plants it's on. But again, I don't think they can purposely, consciously match the colors. I think it's a result of what they feed on.
What is their range?
Of Sheridan's?
Yeah.
Oh, it has quite a wide range, certainly all over the western U.S. and on up into Canada. I should have looked at the range map. I'm not sure how far east it goes, certainly as far as like Colorado, but I'm not sure if it goes much further east than that.
Are there any sightings in western Washington?
Of Sheridan's? No, we have one of the other green hair streaks, actually, that occurs near your cabin over there to William, but not the Sheridan's. Yes?
Did you say it occurs at Schnepflin Coulee?
Yes.
Anywhere else in Kittitas County that you know of?
Yes, we've seen a few of them up Reeser Creek Canyon, but they're not common up there. We've seen a few of them down in the lower part of Umtanum Canyon, where the swinging bridge is across the Yakima River. A few in there. I've seen them further up Umtanum Canyon, where the dirt road crosses, like you're going up to the microwave site. I've seen them up there. So yeah, they occur here and there, but I think the best population is in 70. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David.
have something like a species of the month or something, just a short little presentation. This time I wanted to give a quick presentation on a really neat outbreak of butterflies that Joe and I saw last summer when we were down in Harney County, Oregon. Many of you have probably been to Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. This is right in that area. And here's where we're looking. Here's the city of Burns down here in southeast Oregon. And straight south of it is Malheur Lake. And as you drive down through the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, which is this area, you come to this little tiny town at the south end called French Glen. And this is a Google Earth view looking to the west across French Glen. It's this little teeny town you go through. This is a paved highway, and then the highway climbs up the hill as you leave the Malheur Valley. And in this area, you see all these juniper trees in here. This is the area where the juniper hair streaks had just kind of exploded into really thousands or tens of thousands of butterflies. It was really quite a sight. Here's what the habitat looks like, and of course these are the junipers, which the butterflies eat when they're in their larval stage. In this area we have the same species, different subspecies, and here they feed on cedars, but down there they feed on these junipers, which are closely related. Here's another view. Oh, I think on this one back here, you can see in the distance, way off across the Malheur Valley is the base of Steens Mountain. That's a pretty famous landmark down there. A lot of people like to go down to see Steens Mountain in summer, late summer, because it's snowy early. And this is one of the plants that the hair streaks were really zeroing in for nectar. This is a little yellow daisy, very much like the one we have in Kittitas County. This is one of the Erigeron. I don't think it's the same species that we have, the linear leaf daisy, but it's something very close to it. And here's what the hair streaks look like on the Erigeron. And not just one plant, they were everywhere. It was just amazing. You know, it was one of those times you just start shooting pictures in every direction.
And they were all the same species?
They're all the same species. This is, oh, I think I have the name here in a minute. There it is, Clophrys grinius near Calcasiva. Now that's a name that Andy Warren used in his Butterflies of Oregon. This is the subspecies, and this, as best you can figure, this Calcasiva, which is a subspecies that is found in Nevada, is probably what they have down there. And it's the same thing that we have here in Juniper Dunes in eastern Washington. Anyway, the beautiful butterflies, a lot of purple. This is a big fat female. You see her big abdomen there. And they were just kind of draped all over these flowers. There's another female. They have this really neat big bluish patch on the back of the wings, especially the females. Just, you know, how many pictures do you want of juniper hair streaks?
That's great.
It was really fun. There were so many of them. And we also found them on yellow sweet clover. I don't have any close-ups of butterflies, but you can see there's one there, and there, and there, and there, and there, and there, and there. They're just all over. Just every patch of flowers you find that can deliver nectar, there's just juniper hair streaks all over. There are also some other butterflies around. This is arrowhead blue. Looks a little different than the ones we have here, but you can tell it's an arrowhead blue. And Hesperia juba, the juba skipper, same thing we have here. And water balls blue. This looks, again, a little different than the ones we have here. The spots are, ours usually have a little bit bigger black in the center. This is a female, you can see by her brown wings on the dorsal side there. And the Melissa blue, beautiful, highly colored Melissa blue. And there's other things in the area. There's a National Antelope Refuge, which is probably about 40 miles to the west of there, and it's by way of a lot of dirt roads. But we saw the antelope, but we also saw these really neat California bighorn sheep there. So it was a neat trip. The area where we were, that area right above fields, was burned badly this last summer. There was a big fire there. And I don't know how many of the junipers have survived, but that whole region around there, all you have to do is find a patch of junipers in, what were my dates here? I think it was like, yeah, in mid-June. It was right around June 15th. Just find a patch of junipers down there in the area, you find the hair streaks. It's just amazing.
And that's not unusual, that's what they have every year,
Well,
because that's juniper country.
well, to me, it seemed fantastic, you know, but then I talked to a guy that I know who actually was raised on a ranch down there. Oh yeah, that old stuff. He said that happens every year. So yeah, I think you're likely to find a lot of them every year down there.
And when you say, Dave, that we just got one spot where we have junipers and therefore juniper hair streaks?
We have Juniper Dunes, which is kind of northeast of Tri-Cities, way out in the middle of nowhere, and we do have these same butterflies there. Now it'll take a fairly good hike, maybe an hour hike to really get into the junipers there. We've gone there with a lot of group. And if you're lucky, you'll find the juniper hair streaks. Sometimes they're fairly common, but other times they can be real scarce there. Any questions? For the species profile tonight, I'm going to do the hoary elephant, Cooperate folios, and this might fit in with John's talk because this is one where maybe sometime down the road we might need a new subspecies. It's one of these things that is kind of a, maybe it's necessary, maybe not. This is the hoary elephant that's found up in Okanagan County. Now, many of us have been over to Ides area over on the Tahuya Peninsula where we see the hoary elephant in the springtime. But it looks a little different than this. We'll see a comparison at the end. But notice how dark this little elephant is. Its larvae feed on pinnakinnick, and in fact it's on pinnakinnick here. Archocephalus ubersti.
Yeah.
Picture the egg, little 7/10 of a millimeter egg, very typical of Lycaenids, kind of like a squish tennis ball in shape. And here's the first instar larvae. Very typically, the first instar larvae of many species have proportionately long setae or hairs, and in this case, the head is shiny black. Second instar. Again, pretty typical of Lycaenids. The setae or hairs get a little more spiny, a little stiffer. And as the larva develops, this is in the third instar. Now we're up to about 7 millimeters, which is a little over a quarter of an inch. And the larva suddenly turned green. Previously it was this kind of a brownish green, and then it turns fully green. Here's some feeding patterns on the leaf, very typical feeding. These little guys, by the way, eat a lot of leaves. It's amazing how much they can go through. Usually when I try to rear these, I'll go to the nursery and get 4 or 5 potted plants of kinnikinnick, and by the time they get reared up and pupate, they've pretty well wiped them out. They eat a lot of leaves. Here's the final instar. This guy's feeding not only on leaves, he's feeding on the leaf stems. Much down on that thing. Another one up here. Very green. They developed this very nice side stripe, this green stripe. Another view of the same larva. They're quite handsome. What was the size on this one? It was 14. So they're a little over ½ inch done.
Now it looks like there's a sort of, in the next picture especially, little chevron markings. The next one?
On the next one.
Yeah, is it sort of like these angled up chevron markings? Are those actual, or is that more imagined?
You mean up here?
Yeah.
Oh, they're real, but they're pretty faint. Some of the other hair streaks get very distinct chevron markings, but this is pretty big. As I recall, well, I don't recall. I was going to say something about the Tahuya ones. The pupa is very typical of Lycaenids. It's kind of like a ugly brown oval that's swollen on the one end and a little less swollen on the other. It's real typical. They overwinter as pupae. They generally have some kind of tie down. This one you can see is some silk strands sort of anchoring it down, and they're usually down in the duff underneath the understory. Well, understory, you know. The guinea pig only grows beside a star, so it's really under understory. Here again is the adult, and again, notice how dark it is. We're going to compare this to the one we have over the Hood Canal area, over the Tuahuya Peninsula. Quite a bit of difference there. Notice especially, well, of course the color is one thing. The ones on Tuahuya are pretty red as opposed to pretty gray. Also notice this area. There's a central white line, which both of them have. But notice this area on the one from the Okanagan. See how that's infilled with brown color well above the line, while the one on in Tuahuya is pretty much all pouring, all gray in that area. And there's quite a few other differences. If you look at them for a while, you can spot a number of other things. But to me, they seem like pretty different. The immature stages look very, very similar. I can't see anything significant there. But John, do you have any ideas whether this could someday be a difference?
Well, I know that there's specimens in the American Museum of Natural History from the Tenino area with the name that Sherlock applied to them, which was Insucelia polios teninoensis. So he never got around to describing it. The problem was multiplied now because we're not sure that the Tuahuya and the Puget Prairie populations are identical to start with. They actually seem to be segregated. And then there's two populations in Oregon that are coastal that haven't been described either. So everybody's kind of waiting to see how this all sorts out. There's one in Northern California that has been given a name, and that's Maritima. So the issue becomes, well, how many names do we want in Collophorus polios?
Right.
Have they done DNA testing?
Yeah, DNA between, within a
Among
given
all?
species, yeah, it doesn't show anything. And it's not unusual, actually, that DNA doesn't show much within a species. DNA, in order to, you had a total genome, you might be able to, but the DNA markers that they're using aren't sufficient.
Okay, well anyway, possibility of a new subspecies someday. Meanwhile, when you go up to Moses Meadows, this is the species or the form you're going to see up there. Anytime you have that carpet of kitty connect around, in the springtime, you'll see these little guys flying around. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Bob asked me to do a quick overview of the immatures of skippers for his talk, to complement his talk. So we'll just go through, I'm going to go through very quickly here, but we can start off with spread-wing skippers. We have 11 species of spread-wing skippers, and Bob's going to be talking about the adults, but just take note that the spread-wing skippers can quickly be identified because they land with their wings out flat. All skippers have the recurved antennae, and spread wings have their wings out flat. You don't need to memorize these, but this is just a quick list of the host plants that spread wing skippers use. And the thing to notice here is that there's a lot of plants. There's a lot of variety in these plants. There's trees, there's shrubs, there's all kinds of herbs, there's vetches and lotus and strawberry and cinquefoil clover. All these different plants are all used by our spreadwings. And again, there's only 11 species of spreadwings. So just about every species uses something different than the other spreadwings. This is one of the kinds of spreadwing eggs. There's a lot of variety in this group of skippers. This is kind of, they call this an inflated barrel shape. It doesn't really look like a barrel, but you can see generally this is the bottom, and it has big, strong ribs. Here's another type. This is one of the dusky wings, and has these very intricately ornamented ribs. Quite a pretty little egg. This is one of our most unique eggs, the common city wing. This is a tiny egg. The city wing is a small butterfly, but these little eggs are laid on chenopons or goosefoots, and there's kind of a reddish cast to the green in these plants, and it's real easy to overlook these eggs. You can be looking right at them and not see them. But it's one of the most uniquely shaped eggs that we have in all of our butterflies. Here's a typical Spread wing larva. This is the mature larva of the same one we just looked at. It came out of one of these eggs. Skipper larvae, by and large, get big. They get much bigger than you'd expect for the size of the butterflies. And this is quite a large one. And when it gets ready to pupate, it'll start shrinking, and then the pupa will be about only half as long as the size of this mature larva. That's pretty typical. All skippers have a collar. Some of them are distinctly colored like this one. Most of them are actually either white or black. But that's real typical of skippers. They have a collar. Here's another type. This is one of our cloudy wings, or our only cloudy wing, and again, there's that distinct collar. This is a mature larva. You can see this one is on a type of lotus, a vetch type plant. The dusky wings have shaped faces. They're pretty well identifiable by the shape of the head capsule. This one's kind of a modified heart shape, and then the pattern of dark on brown or dark on light also helps you to identify our 4 species of dusky wings.
Do you know how well they see through those capsules?
The sensory organs for caterpillars are real rudimentary. I don't know that you can really say they see. They can sense light, and some of their sensory organs are actually in their body, not so much in their head capsule. But they don't really have eyes per se in the head capsule. So, no, I don't. Here's an interesting skipper larva. This is a silver spotted skipper, one of our most ornate larvae. This one is in the process of molting. This is the 4th instar. It's going to molt the 5th instar. And you can see all these bright colors. There's fuchsia and orange, red, black, yellow. It's quite a colorful larva. What's happened here is the previous, this instar larva has pulled its head out of the head capsule. It's pulled it back, and this head capsule is now vacant. This big bulge here in the neck is the new head capsule that's going to burst out on the same walls. And actually, these orange things, that's false eyes that these things have. And when it pulled its head out of this capsule, this used to have false eye spots here, but as soon as it pulled its head out, they went black. So this is a larva that's in transition. Going to pop out to the 5th instar. All of our skippers, I was thinking about this when I was preparing the talk. I believe all of our skippers make nests. All of our larvae make nests, which is far from the case with all the other butterflies. Many of our butterfly larvae do not make nests of any kind, but I think all of our skippers do. And these are the nests of silver spotted skipper. These are little 1st instars, and this is Lotus crassifolius from over by Aggie's cabin on the Tahuya Peninsula. And here's one little nest, and here's another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. They're fairly common when you find a plant that's had a lot of eggs laid on it. And here's another type of nest. This is one of our checkered skippers. And this is on a strawberry. It just folded the leaf over and tied it in place with a bunch of silk webbing. Other skippers, well, I'll be getting into the grass skippers later. Here's a typical pupa of our spread-wing skippers. When you look at them from the front, from the head, it looks like a baby seal's face. I don't have a head-on picture, but they have a real unique-looking little face with the eyes and the mouth, and they're kind of cute from the front. Here's another pupa. This is a silver spotted skipper. This is kind of a unique one. We're actually below the pupa and looking up, and this is a hanging pupa. This is a nest that's made out of lotus, and I've cut away half of it so we can look in and see this pupa. And it has this loose sling around its body, and it's hanging in that. And at this end, it's just attached at the tip here with the cremaster. And the pupa doesn't actually touch the nest. It's hanging in space inside of this loose leaf nest. And that's a real interesting kind of pupa that we see, as far as I know, only in the silver spotted skipper and in the northern cloudy wing, just 2 species. The grass skippers are a larger group. There's 17 species. We only have 11 spread wings. They're also called monocot skippers. And they typically hold their, well, they always hold their wings in one of two patterns. This one has its wings over its back vertically, and otherwise they will hold their wings in this kind of position where the hind wings are horizontal and the fore wings are up at about a 45-degree angle, but they never rest with all of their wings out flat like the spread wing skippers do. So you can tell at a glance if you have a grass skipper or a spread wing skipper.
Dave, is there a term used to describe that posture?
Jet fighter? That's right.
What did you say?
I don't know unless it's...
Jet fighter. That's what you said.
Jet fighter. F-15, whatever. Here's the host plants for grass skippers. Kind of a different list. Trees and shrubs, none. Monocots, which is grasses, they feed on grasses and sedges. All 15 species of them. They're kind of monotonous that way.
Are they all different, or they, can you all use, very often can use the same kind of grasses?
Yeah, they're not terribly, you can rear skippers on a variety of grasses. As far as which ones will the female lay her eggs on, they tend to be a little selective. And in many cases, we don't really know that precisely what their host plants are, because grasses are really difficult to identify. And so a lot of these species, a lot of these butterflies will have their grass identified to genus, but not the species. So it's just a tough area to really figure out exactly what their host plants are. This is a real typical egg. They're flat on the bottom, and they're kind of round dome shaped. They can be smooth, they can be textured like this one. Sometimes they'll develop color patterns as they mature, as in the tawny edge skipper here, one of our Pleiades skippers. The dun skipper, just before it's ready to, it doesn't look like there's any larvae in there, but it's just about ready to pop here. And they develop this blood red ring on the bullseye just before they hatch. European skipperlings are an introduced species, and it's coming down from Bellingham. It's also entering the state over in Pend Oreille County, and they have a real unique egg that looks a little bit like a sore throat tablet. They line these up inside of a grass blade, and then in my experience, rearing these things at home, in my experience, as the grass blade grows out or dries out at the end of the season, it rolls over and encases it in a tube. So they have this nice capsule that the eggs are in until the next spring when they hatch. Here's a typical grass skipper, or a grass skipper larva. This one is ready again to, I believe this is the final instar, fifth instar, so I think this one was ready to pupate rather than molt to the next instar. But you can see it here again, this big swollen neck. That's a good indication that something's just about ready to happen. But again, they have a dark head, and they have this real distinct collar, and this big kind of, well, of course the body's segmented. Here's a segment line and another one and another one. But they also have these little rolls or folds in between each of the segments.
What's the scientific name on that one again? Genus at least?
This is a Hesperia Colorado, this one. Or Hesperia comma, I'm sorry, this is Hesperia comma. Yeah. We do have some larvae that are much more elongated. This is, again, there's our important species, European skipperling. Long, slender body, and we have a couple other species of grass skippers that have a similar body shape. This is one of our Pleiades skippers. Again, it looks a lot like the Hesperia we just looked at, a big, heavy larva that turns pretty dark when it's mature. This one has a black and white color, so it's a little bit different. Here's another of our very slender larvae. This is our dun skipper, again, the one that had the red-ringed egg. This is Euphes vestris, quite a distinct larva. And this is a nest of a grass skipper. There are two kinds of nests. There's, as I indicated here, there's aerial nests and what I call basal nests. Aerial nests are not floating in the air, but they're above ground. And they can, most often they're a blade of grass or a sedge or or something of the sort, and the larva is vertical in that way, and they wrap the blade around and they'll stitch it. There's little horizontal stitches, nice tiny little stitches. But this is one of the basal nests. They're pretty messy. They're just a cluster of grass blades all tied together, and there's a larva inside of there. This one looks like it's above ground, but in nature they'll be right down at the ground level, at the base of the grass. Very, very difficult to find. The aerial nests are typically pretty easy to find. Here's a pupa. This is the woodland skipper, very common species. Not too much to say about it. It's a little bit squarish at the head, and otherwise it's kind of a round pupa. Here's another skipper very closely related to the woodland. This is the young skipper. And again, you can see that it's been encased in this is a giant reed, a Phragmites leaf, and it's had it rolled over and it's pupated inside there. Here's the whole head capsule of the larva. And you can see it's secreted some white material. A lot of our skippers do that. And that white material is like a waxy substance that makes them waterproof. And so anyway, so this gives you an idea of the nest that this one pupated in. Here's the European skipperling, kind of a unique pupa with a funny little projection here. You can see it has a tie down here to stabilize it while it's waiting to eclose. And the Arctic skipper, this was actually not a grass skipper, but I lumped it in because they eat grass. But this is one species, Cardosopolis, which belongs to a different subfamily. We have 3 subfamilies of skippers: the grass skippers, the spread-wing skippers, and this group, which doesn't have a real good common heteromalpiny, but you have to remember that. And here's the den skipper again. It is one of our grass skippers, kind of a unique pupa, kind of sawed off in one end, kind of an ugly little pupa that was rolled in a leaf. This is one of David James's pictures, and this is the Propertius dusky wing on Gary Oak. And you can see see this little nest here, and another nest, and another one. And here's some eggs that haven't hatched yet. And so this is, they feed only on Gary Oak, and when you find the nest, you can see all these leaves have been skeletonized by the larvae. So that's just another indication of one of the patterns of nests you might see. So that's all I have on a quick introduction to the matures. And Bob's going to talk about the mature larvae here.